Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to be podcasting with you. Season 2 is going to start soon, but let's talk about Season 1.
Yes, Season 1 is wrapping up with 11 episodes. We were able to interview and podcast a broad array of alumni, and we're excited to transition and pass on the torch to a brand new season with Phillip.
Thank you, Phillip. I'm very honored to have the torch passed to me for Season 2. I'm super excited. I think it's a real fun opportunity to actually catch up with folks, and I'm sure you felt the same way.
Yeah.
Just like to talk to people and hear about their experience. It's really fun to meet even new people. So just a little snippet for what's going to be coming for Season 2. We have a lot of fun stories to share. Some photos that alumni have been willing to dig up and find for us. So I'm excited to be hosting Season 2, and I have a lot of big shoes to fill, as you would say.
Yeah, and before we move on to Season 2, this is sort of a transition episode, and V gets to interview me, the host for Season 1.
This is fun. Yeah. I think that it would be a great transition for us, and we're actually podcasting from our friend Vanessa's house, episode 8, I think, Season 1, and she is gracious enough to let us podcast in her bottom level. We thought it would be great to just do it in person and have it transition for Season 1 to Season 2. We're actually now in the Bay Area in San Francisco, East Bay, overlooking the Oakland Hills.
Yes.
Very beautiful. I just want to tell listeners kind of what your day looked like today and how we come here tonight to podcast. Tell us how you kind of just came to the Bay Area, actually. Start off with that.
Yeah, so before I can tell you about how I got to the Bay Area, I have to tell you what happened to me after I left Florida. After graduating in 2011, I actually spent my last semester in Singapore. And so from January to May of 2011, I did a study abroad in Singapore, and that was my last semester at UF. Finished up, graduated, and moved straight to the big island of Hawaii, where I spent the next 5 years teaching middle school and high school through the Teach for America program, and then later on just teaching on my own at a private boarding school. And so my transition actually took me from Florida, and I had a temporary stay in Singapore and then Hawaii for 5 years. And then in 2016, that's when I moved to the Bay to pursue a master's degree in Asian American Studies at San Francisco State. And so I am coming up on my 5th year in the Bay Area, which
amazing.
Is my 10th year after my college graduation, which is scary.
Yeah. And remind folks who don't know you, if you just say your name, what year you graduated, and what you graduated in.
Yeah. So my name is Phillip Cheng, graduated in 2011, got a bachelor's degree of science in industrial and systems engineering, as well as a bachelor's of arts in East Asian languages, Chinese.
Wow, very specific. And did they have Chinese classes at the time when you went to UF?
So, they had beginning, intermediate, and advanced, and they had one more level after that. And I think that the major East Asian languages is not there anymore. I think they've changed it to just Asian languages.
Asian languages, yeah. Because I felt like that was also, I remember talking to you about that back then, just what you were actually studying, because I know you were studying multiple things. Super, super cool. And then what you mentioned, what you did after graduation. So you went to Singapore a little bit, and then you went to Hawaii. But what kind of prompted you to start thinking about teaching, actually? Because that wasn't really what you studied for.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, right? Because 2 degrees, one engineering, one in Chinese, none of them are teaching. And then I become a middle school math teacher. I think by junior year, after having spent a few years with the Asian American community, specifically with the Asian American Student Union and the suborgs, I started to realize that I really enjoyed interacting with my fellow students. But I also had this sense, sort of this gut feeling inside me that I really would enjoy teaching and that I wanted to be a teacher. And I think that feeling actually went all the way back to high school. But I guess when I entered UF, I wanted to major in something practical, something that was useful, right? And by junior year, I was almost finished. And so I didn't want to change my major. I said, okay, I'm just going to finish these degrees, but Teach for America was an option, that allowed me to sort of take the expressway into teaching, get my teaching credentials.
Head first,
head in, and then just, I also, during the Teach for America program, I got a master's in teaching from Honolulu, Chaminade University of Honolulu.
Oh, wow.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what allowed me to just fully dive into the world of teaching, and I loved it, and so I think a lot of people would characterize my path as sort of untraditional, if you will.
Yeah, and you kind of learned those skill sets probably along the way,
on the
you
job.
Didn't study it. Obviously, no one really taught you how to be a teacher. But I do feel like your experience at UF working with so many student orgs and just interacting with your fellows, our fellow peers, it kind of prompted you kind of already for that opportunity. So in a way, you kind of set yourself up, so it's okay.
I remember when I was the director of Asian Kaleidoscope Month back in 2010, I would host these seminars on Asian American studies. And at UF, we had a handful of Asian American studies classes, but just not too much. And I just wanted to replicate that. And I said, as director, I want my staff to be educated in Asian American issues and studies, and I'm just going to have to learn it and put it on. And, that sort of did lead into my career in teaching, which then led into my master's degree in Asian American studies.
And did you do lesson planning for your students, in kind of that mindset where, you're going to learn everything that I didn't know?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, when I was teaching math, at least, I drew a lot from my own middle school and high school math experiences, and I wanted to teach them. I was teaching Algebra 1 and pre-calculus, so very foundational classes. So I wanted to give them a good foundation, but I also wanted to teach them really cool stuff, not be like a boring teacher. I was a cool teacher.
You're a cool teacher. But that's, yeah, I find that the middle school years are so instrumental because you kind of start understanding who you are as a person. You're kind of starting to make your friend group, and you're kind of realizing kind of who you are.
Learning about yourself.
Yeah, learning about yourself as an almost an adult at that point because you'll be going to high school, and I think middle school is such a formative year, years of your life.
Large influence, and they say for teachers that if you can teach middle school, you can teach anything, because of sort of that somewhat at times turbulent time period in a student's or a kid's life, and so I've found that within my teaching circle, you're either middle school all the way or you're not middle school all the way. And I'm in the camp of not middle school all the way. I really enjoyed teaching high school. But I'm glad that I had 2 years worth of teaching in middle school because it taught me, it was like a boot camp for me. They taught me how to be a good teacher.
Yep, exactly. So, I'm sure that was fun. And then after you left Hawaii, like you said, you came to San Francisco to get your master's. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
So, as I was wrapping up my 4th year in Hawaii, I felt that Asian American studies was something that I wanted to pursue very seriously. And as I said before, UF didn't really have an Asian American studies program, but I had that passion, and I had that drive, and which was given to me through my experiences in the Asian American community there. And I said, it's either now or never. And it was something that I knew that I wanted to do sometime in my life, and it was just the right time. I started applying my last year teaching in Hawaii. I started to apply to grad programs. And I got into San Francisco State, and they gave me a really good sort of package, and that's where I moved to in 2016.
And I don't know much about this academia world, but can you tell listeners like how many schools actually even like offer this type of program? Like I know it's not many.
Yeah, not many. But I would say the top programs that have master's degrees are only UCLA, San Francisco State. There might be one more. I think it's UC Irvine. Not too sure, but definitely UCLA for sure and San Francisco State. And they're mainly concentrated on the West Coast. I think in other parts of the country, you might hear ethnic studies and you might hear American studies. And so, but it's not a huge movement, and Asian American studies is a terminal master's degree program, meaning that if you want to continue pursuing Asian American studies, which is interdisciplinary, you have to go into a disciplinary field of like English or history or sociology, and then your focus within that field will be Asian American studies.
Interesting. Wow. Very specific. And did you, what did you do afterwards? Did you pivot to something different, or did you, stay in academia?
Yeah. So it took me 3 years to get my master's in Asian American studies. And I told myself that because I'm in the Bay, in the heart of Silicon Valley, I should try to get into tech, namely ed tech, because I wanted to leverage my teaching, my 5 years of teaching somehow, and sort of get into what educational technology looks like. And I had a good time. I jumped around. I did sales. I did outreach. I did partnerships, just a lot of different things. I worked at a total of 3 different startup companies, which is, the startup life in the Bay, which is not for everyone, but I'm glad I got a taste of it. But now I am at Stanford University working in student affairs.
Which I feel like is more your home.
Yeah, it's definitely more me. And I'm enjoying it every day, just being able to help students in a staff capacity, sort of just, achieve their goals. And it brings me a lot of joy to be able to help students in that way.
Yeah, I feel like I find that giving back to someone that is less knowledgeable is probably the best thing at this point in the stage of their life, because in college and even in high school, I was like, I don't know anything. If someone told me to like do this and that, I'd be like, sure, do this and that.
Yeah.
Like my high school academic advisor was like, you probably should just apply to like these 5 schools. I was like, okay, like face value, took it for what he said, and I was like, okay, I'll apply to those 5 schools. Like I didn't know anything back then either, so I feel like any guidance that you're able to give to younger folks, it's like sort of like we said earlier, so formative in their early life that like.
It's kind of like almost getting paid to do FLP, which was the freshman leadership program that you and I both did when we were undergrads. And it's just the levels, we were upperclassmen, the freshmen, were first years. And so giving advice was very fun. And now I get paid to do it on a more broader scale.
Yeah. Now that you get paid, it's even better. And I think my other question for you was really for those who are still at UF that are listening, or those who are just in like a pivotal point in their career, kind of just any advice that you would give to folks who are like trying to transition or find something different, or even just like branching out and just like pursuing their passions, that they might take a chance and like leave a stable 9 to 5 and try something new. What advice would you give to those people?
Such a great question, and so many sort of different ways I could possibly answer it. But I'll say this, I think maybe my overarching theme would be listen to your gut, and also go with the flow, but go with the times, right? And what I mean by that is I studied engineering, and I didn't become an engineer, but Teach for America was just really big. I don't know if it's still big, if they heavily recruit at UF still, but they were just such heavy recruiters at UF at the time. And I said, this is it. This is my opportunity, right? I'm going to take it, right? And so I sort of went with it. And same thing when I moved to the Bay, it just kind of felt right. And I ended up applying to grad programs, and they gave me like a good package, and it felt right, and so I did it. But I also say that for me, for example, with Asian American studies, I didn't pursue that until 5 years after graduation. And I think for listeners out there, I would say you have passions, you have things that you're really interested in, and sometimes it's just not the right time.
So it might not be the right time.
It might not be the right time, but don't just put it to the side. Don't like tuck it away forever. Put it to the side and remember that it's there. Whether it be I want to go back to grad school, or I want to do this, or I want to be good at that. Just keep it there and don't forget about it. And when the time is right, listen to yourself, listen to your gut. When the time is right, go for it. I think that there are still so many things that I want to do in life, and they're just being put to the side right now. But it doesn't mean that I'm never going to do them. And I commit myself to saying, okay, Phillip, you're going to write a book. You're going to learn. I love arts and crafts and stuff. And I want to do woodworking, I also love cooking. So one day I'm going to do some cooking classes. Or my most recent venture is that I just got my real estate license, and that was something that I didn't know when that would happen. And I knew I was always interested in real estate ever since I was, watching HGTV and all those home shows. And I said, one day in the future, I'm going to do it. And the opportunity presented itself last year when, unfortunately, I was laid off for a period of time, but I said, this is the perfect time for me to study real estate. And I did, and I got my license. And so, so go with your gut and go with the flow.
Yeah, go with the flow. That's great advice. And can you talk a little bit about what you researched during your master's program, API studies, and focusing on Asian American students? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I loved my master's program. I learned so much, and part of most master's programs that you do, you write a thesis or you have a culminating project, and I did my research on Asian students who studied at UF in the 1900s, in the early 1900s. And I specifically focused on 2 Chinese students who studied at UF in 1915 and in 1919, where at a time where there was only all male, all white, students at UF, Gainesville was truly a swamp. And it was just such a fun project to do because it related to me so much, even though I went to school basically 100 years later. And yet I felt so connected to them because they were just, I was the only Asian kid growing up in my school. And though there were a lot of Asian American students during our time at UF, I still felt like, it was such a unique experience to say that I'm Asian American and I'm a Gator, and I'm proud of that, And during my time researching, I found that they also shared sort of similar moments, those 2 students, where they were Asian, they were from China, they were sort of the only ones there, and they really loved UF, they were warmly welcomed by their classmates, and they left such a good impression, not only on the university, but on their classmates. And in fact, a tidbit. So you remember the statue of a man sitting in front of Chrysler Hall?
Yes.
Do you know who that is?
No.
So that is A.A. Murphy. Murphy
Hall.
Yeah, Murphy. He was the second president of UF. And that is a statue of him. And he had a very close relationship with one of the Chinese students, and they would write back and forth letters. And those letters can be found in Library East.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. And then the other Chinese student, he had a really good relationship with Professor, I believe it was Newell of Newell Hall, right? Yeah. And on his application
This was the second student?
So on his application so back then, they didn't have visas, but they had applications. They had these forms that they had to fill out, and they had to put the names of white men that could verify that they were students. and that they were of good character. And that student, one of the Chinese students, listed Professor Newell. And I thought that was so cool because, there's so many buildings at UF, and, they have all the names of like old professors, right? Professors from the past, but we don't really know who they are. We just say, oh, I'm going to go to Newell, I'm going to go to Anderson, I'm going to go to Matherly, but we don't know who these people were, but these students did. And I thought that was just so cool.
That is really cool. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing, Phillip.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say, thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself on the podcast. I know this whole season 1, you've been talking to everybody else, including myself, about ourselves. So really fun to chat with you tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And just like any closing notes, shout outs, remarks that you would like to say as we wrap up.
A few shout outs, definitely to Assistant Vice President Mary Kay Schneider-Carradine, Nancy Krista Green, who is, I believe, still the director of the Rights Union. They were just really pivotal at my time at UF. Also, graduate student who oversaw the APIA sort of just affairs, but it wasn't even an office. He was just a graduate student to Cato Nakao. All my fellow Asian American Student Union peers and colleagues really enjoyed that, and my Chinese department and my engineering department, but I kind of enjoyed Chinese more. So.
And I just want to say one true testament of just who you are as a person. You've kept in touch with so many people throughout, your time at UF and also post-grad as well. And I'm just thankful for our friendship that has sustained now 10 years, 10 plus years. So that's amazing. And I think that having people in your life, people in my life like you as a constant, just reminds me of where we came from. And, we pretty much started at the same place. So now we're just circling full circle back in the Bay Area. So very thankful to have you in my life.
Oh, same here. And I can't wait for COVID to be over so that we can have reunions in Gainesville at UF and sort of just be amongst our peers and other alumni.
Yeah, totally excited for that. Thanks, Phillip, for joining me on the podcast. On behalf of the UF Association for Asian Alumni, thanks for listening to When I Became a Gator podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever you find this episode. To find out more, please visit ufasianalumni.com.